Long before the tall towers of New York, there was a boy named Rick Rescorla. He grew up to be a very brave man, a soldier who knew how to face danger. Rick wasn't just brave in a simple way. He was brave in a way that made him think of others first, always. He fought in many wars, in far-off lands, where the sounds of battle filled the air. Each time, no matter how scary it got, Rick stood strong. He wasn't just fighting for himself or for glory. He was fighting to protect his friends, his country, and the people he didn't even know. Imagine a soldier, tough and ready, but also kind and thoughtful. That was Rick. He learned how to be smart and quick, always thinking ahead to keep his fellow soldiers safe. He knew how to lead, and people trusted him because they could see his heart was true. Whether it was in the hot jungles of Vietnam or other places where soldiers had to be extra careful, Rick was there, leading the way. He would plan carefully, making sure everyone knew what to do, and he would often be the first to step into harm's way if it meant someone else could be safe. He saw many hard things in those wars, things that would make most people want to hide. But Rick never hid. He used what he learned about danger and safety to make sure his team was always prepared. He had a special way of looking at things, always trying to find problems before they happened. This wasn't just about being a good soldier. It was about being a good person who deeply cared about the well-being of others. This strong spirit, this caring heart, would stay with him long after his soldier days were over, and it would become very important much later in his life. After years of brave service, Rick Rescorla's time as a soldier came to an end. He had faced many dangers and learned so much about keeping people safe. But his journey wasn't over. He moved to a new kind of battlefield, a very different place from the jungles and war zones he once knew. This new place was bustling with people, tall buildings and bright lights, New York City. In this giant city, Rick found a job that might seem very different from being a soldier, but it still let him use his smarts and his caring heart. He started working for a big company called Morgan Stanley. This company had its offices in one of the most famous buildings in the world, the World Trade Center. Imagine two incredibly tall towers, reaching high into the sky, like giant twins made of glass and steel. These were the World Trade Center towers, and they were full of thousands of people working every day. Rick became the head of security for Morgan Stanley. This meant it was his job to make sure all the workers in their offices were safe. He worked in the South Tower, which was one of the two very tall buildings. It was a busy place, with elevators rushing up and down, phones ringing, and people hurrying to their desks. Rick walked through the hallways, looked at the safety plans, and thought about all the ways he could protect everyone. Even though he wasn't in a war anymore, Rick still had that soldier's mind, always thinking about what could go wrong and how to fix it. He knew that even in a big, safe-looking office building, dangers could pop up. Fire, power outages, or even something worse. Rick thought about it all. His new uniform was a suit and tie, but his mission was still the same, to keep people out of harm's way. He looked at the tall towers, full of life, and felt a deep sense of responsibility. He would use all his experience from the army to make sure everyone in that building was as safe as could be. Rick Rescorla brought his soldier's keen eye and protective spirit to his new job at the World Trade Center. He didn't just sit at a desk. He walked around, observed, and most importantly, worried. Not a worry that made him scared, but a worry that made him think ahead. He knew that even the safest places could face trouble, and he wanted to be ready for anything. His mind was always busy, thinking about what-ifs. What if there was a fire? What if the power went out? What if something even worse happened, in such a tall building? Rick remembered his days in the army, where being prepared was the key to staying alive. He believed the same was true for the thousands of people working in the World Trade Center. He didn't just want to be ready himself. He wanted everyone to be ready. So Rick made it his mission to teach everyone what to do in an emergency. He created plans clear and easy to understand. He didn't just put them on paper. He made sure people actually knew them. He taught them where the emergency exits were, how to use the stairs, and what to do if they heard an alarm. He wanted every single person to feel confident and know exactly how to act if something bad ever happened. Sometimes, people might have thought Rick was a bit too serious about all these emergency plans. They worked in a big, modern building, after all. But Rick knew better. He knew that in a real emergency, fear can make people forget everything. That's why practice and clear instructions were so important. He believed that if people knew what to do, they would be calmer and much safer. His goal was to make sure that if trouble ever knocked on their door, no one would be caught by surprise. Rick wanted every person in the World Trade Center to be ready, just like a well-trained soldier. Rick didn't just write down emergency plans and hope for the best. He put them into action. He knew that just reading about something wasn't enough. People needed to ask Rick do it. So Rick made sure they practiced. A lot. He would call for fire drills, and the loud alarms would blare through the offices of Morgan Stanley. Now, imagine you're busy at your desk, working hard, and suddenly a loud alarm goes off. Most people would groan. "Oh, not again," they might think. They'd sigh, grab their bags, and slowly start walking towards the stairs. Some might even complain, "Does Rick really think a fire will happen every week?" Others might giggle and make jokes, thinking he was being a bit silly. After all, fires in huge modern buildings like the World Trade Center seemed very unlikely. But Rick didn't care if people thought he was silly or too serious. He had seen real danger, and he knew how quickly things could go wrong. He knew that practice makes perfect, and in an emergency, perfect could mean the difference between life and death. He would stand at the exits, watching as everyone walked down the many, many stairs. He'd time them, making sure they were moving quickly but safely. He'd remind them to stay calm, to help each other, and to follow the signs. He even had them practice going all the way down to the street level, from their offices high up in the tower. That's a very long walk down. People would get tired, and some would grumble about their sore feet. But Rick would just shake his head and say, "Better tired now than sorry later." He knew that one day, this practice, this seemingly silly routine, might save their lives. He was like a coach, training his team for a game he hoped they'd never have to play, but making sure they were ready if they did. The morning of September 11th, 2001, started like any other Tuesday. People were heading to work, drinking coffee, and getting ready for their day in the bustling offices of the World Trade Center. Rick Rescorla was already there, as always, making sure everything was in order. The sun was shining, and the sky was a clear blue, a perfect autumn day in New York City. No one could have known that this ordinary morning would soon turn into one of the most unforgettable and tragic days in history. Suddenly, at 8:46 a.m., the peace was shattered. A huge noise ripped through the air, followed by a violent shaking that rattled the very foundations of the buildings. High up in the North Tower, one of the two giant twin buildings, a passenger plane crashed into it with incredible force. There was a terrible roar, a giant burst of flames, and a huge cloud of smoke that began to billow from the side of the skyscraper. People inside felt the entire building sway and heard a sound like thunder, only much, much worse. Everyone was shocked and scared. What was happening? Was it an earthquake? A bomb? Nobody knew for sure, but the signs were clear. Something terrible had just happened. For a few moments, confusion filled the air. Then, just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., an even more shocking and terrifying event occurred. Another plane, flying fast and low, crashed directly into the South Tower, Rick Rescorla's tower. This second crash was even more devastating. It hit lower down than the first, tearing a huge hole in the building and causing a massive explosion. Fireballs shot out from the side of the tower, and debris rained down onto the streets below. The building shook violently, and a thunderous boom echoed across the city. Inside, the noise was deafening. The lights flickered, and smoke began to spread rapidly. This wasn't a drill. This was a real, horrifying emergency, exactly what Rick had always feared and prepared for. The day that would test everyone's courage, especially Rick's, had arrived. When the second plane hit the South Tower, the entire building shook with a force that knocked people off their feet. Smoke and dust filled the air, and screams of fear echoed through the hallways. For a moment, it was pure chaos. But amidst the terror, one man stood firm, Rick Rescorla. This was the moment he had always prepared for, the very reason for all those drills and plans. While others panicked, Rick's soldier training kicked in. His mind was clear. He didn't hesitate, didn't waste a second. He knew exactly what had to be done. His first thought wasn't for his own safety, but for the thousands of people who worked for Morgan Stanley, many of whom were now trapped high above the ground. He had promised to keep them safe, and now was the time to deliver on that promise. He immediately got on his megaphone, his voice strong and steady, cutting through the noise and fear. "Keep calm," he shouted. "Walk, don't run. Remember the drills." He began directing people towards the emergency stairwells, the very paths they had practiced so many times. He knew the building's layout like the back of his hand, and he guided them with confidence, even as the building groaned around them. The Port Authority, the people in charge of the building, told everyone to stay put, saying the building was safe. But Rick, with his soldier's instinct and his deep understanding of danger, knew they were wrong. He ignored their orders, knowing that waiting would be deadly. He trusted his own judgment, a judgment honed by years of war and careful planning. He urged everyone to evacuate, to use the stairs, to get out now. His actions were brave, going against official instructions, but he believed it was the only way to save lives. He was a general in a war he never wanted, but he was ready to lead his people to safety. As the World Trade Center groaned and smoke began to fill the air, making it hard to see and breathe, Rick Rescorla's voice became a beacon of hope. He held his megaphone firmly, his words cutting through the rising panic and the terrible sounds of the damaged building. "This is Rescorla! Keep moving! You know the way," he boomed, his voice steady and full of purpose. The smoke was thick and gray, making it even scarier for everyone. It stung their eyes and made them cough, but Rick kept shouting, giving clear, simple instructions. "Stay to the right! Help each other! No pushing! No running!" He moved through the crowds, a calm figure in a sea of scared faces. He knew that in moments of extreme danger, people need a strong leader, a voice they can trust. He was that voice. His calm words were like a lifeline. People looked to him, their eyes wide with fear, and saw a man who wasn't panicking. His confidence was contagious. Even though the situation was terrifying, Rick's presence helped people remember their drills. They started to move in an orderly line, just as he had taught them heading for the stairwells. He didn't just give orders, he offered encouragement. "You're doing great! Almost there!" He'd yell, knowing that a little positive push could make a big difference when people were tired and frightened. He knew that if he could keep them calm, they would be able to think more clearly and move more efficiently. The smoke might have been getting thicker, the building might have been shaking, but Rick's voice remained a constant, guiding sound, pulling people away from the danger and towards safety. He was a shepherd leading his flock through a storm, making sure no one was left behind in the growing darkness. The long walk down the smoky stairwells was not just tiring. It was deeply frightening. People were scared, some crying, some quiet with shock. The air was thick with dust, and the sounds of the damaged building creaked and groaned around them. Rick knew that just shouting orders wasn't enough. He needed to do something more, something to reach into their hearts and pull them away from despair. So Rick did something truly unexpected. He lifted his megaphone, not just for instructions, but for a song. He began to sing, his strong voice echoing through the stairwell. He chose old army songs, tunes he knew from his days as a soldier, songs that were full of courage, and sometimes a little bit funny. He sang Men of Harlech, a marching song that soldiers had sung for ages, and then God Bless America. At first, people were surprised. Singing? Now? But then, something amazing happened. As Rick's voice filled the air, a few people started to smile, a little at first, then more. Some even began to sing along, humming the tunes they knew. The fear in their eyes didn't completely vanish, but it lessened. The heavy feeling in the air seemed to lighten a bit. The sounds of the collapsing building didn't seem quite so loud. Rick's singing was a powerful trick. It wasn't about being a good singer. It was about bringing a spark of normalcy and hope into a terrible situation. It made people feel like they weren't alone, that there was still some joy, some human spirit left even in the middle of chaos. It helped them forget their fear for a moment and focus on moving forward, one step at a time. Laughter, even a little bit, is a strong medicine, and Rick, the brave soldier, knew just how to use it to save thousands, not just with his plans, but with his heart and his voice. The journey down the countless flights of stairs was long and hard. Each step felt like a mile, and the air grew heavier with smoke and dust. People were exhausted, their legs aching, their minds filled with worry. Rick knew that keeping their bodies moving was important, but keeping their spirits from breaking was even more vital. So in between his powerful songs, Rick started telling jokes. He'd crack a funny line, maybe about how long the walk was, or a silly story from his army days. His humor, even simple jokes, made people forget, just for a moment, the danger they were in. You'd hear a little giggle here, a soft chuckle there, slowly spreading through the tired lines of people. It was a small sound, but in that scary stairwell, it was like a ray of sunshine. He also shared stories, tales of bravery from his past, or just funny things he'd seen. He talked about his home, his family, things that reminded people of their own lives, waiting for them outside. He wasn't just a security guard anymore. He was a leader, a storyteller, a friend. He walked up and down the lines of people, sometimes going ahead, sometimes staying behind, making sure no one was left alone or feeling lost. He'd clap people on the back, offer a kind word, or just a steady gaze that said, "We'll get through this together." Rick knew that fear grows in silence and darkness. By filling the stairwell with his voice, with songs, with jokes, and with stories, he pushed back against that fear. He created a small bubble of hope and human connection in a place of terrible danger. He kept their minds busy and their hearts hopeful, making the impossible journey seem a little less daunting. He was leading them not just with his directions, but with his very spirit, reminding them that even in the worst moments there could still be a reason to smile, a reason to keep going. As the stream of people moved slowly down the stairs, guided by Rick's steady voice and hopeful songs, many thought of only one thing: getting out. But Rick's mind was different. He wasn't just thinking about the people he could see. He was thinking about the people he couldn't see. Were there others still up there, lost, injured, or too scared to move? So, after making sure a large group was on their way down, Rick did something incredibly brave, something that showed his true hero's heart. He turned around. He went back into the burning, shaking building. He didn't just go once, he went many times. Each time, he climbed back up the smoky stairs, searching for anyone who might have been left behind. He went to different floors, calling out, "Morgan Stanley! Is anyone here?" He searched offices, peered into darkened rooms, and listened for any sound of life. He knew the risks. The building was heavily damaged, groaning and creaking, and smoke made it hard to see. But he wouldn't stop. His duty, his promise to protect, was stronger than his own fear. He found people who were frozen with terror, unable to move. He found others who were hurt. With his calm voice and gentle but firm guidance, he helped them. He put his arm around them, spoke encouraging words, and led them back to the stairwells, down towards the light and safety. He was like a shepherd leaving the 99 to find the one lost lamb. He kept going, up and down, pushing himself past exhaustion, driven by the simple, powerful need to save every single person he could. He wouldn't rest until he was sure no one from his company was left behind. Rick's tireless efforts, his brave trips back into the danger, and his calm, guiding voice made an incredible difference. As the minutes ticked by, more and more people from Morgan Stanley streamed out of the World Trade Center's South Tower and onto the streets below. They were covered in dust, tired and shaken, but they were alive. Think about that number, almost 700 people. That's like a whole small town escaping from a terrible disaster. Because Rick had insisted on all those fire drills, because he had taught them the routes, and because he had kept them calm and moving, they knew what to do. They remembered his instructions, his songs, and his jokes. They followed his lead, step by painful step, down hundreds of flights of stairs. When they reached the safety of the ground, they looked back up at the smoking tower, hardly believing they had made it out. Many of them would later say that they would not have survived if it hadn't been for Rick Rescorla. His leadership, his refusal to give up, and his sheer courage in the face of such horror saved nearly every single person from his company. While other companies in the World Trade Center lost many people, Morgan Stanley, thanks to Rick's preparation and bravery, had very few losses. This was not by accident. It was because one man took his job seriously, worried about others, and prepared for the worst, even when others thought he was being too much. He proved that all those silly drills and all that planning were not silly at all. They were life-saving. Rick Rescorla had truly delivered on his promise to protect his people. With almost all of his people safely out of the South Tower, Rick Rescorla had done his job, and more. He had saved thousands of lives. He could have walked out of the building himself, a hero, and gone home to his family. But that wasn't Rick. His heart wouldn't let him leave until he was absolutely sure no one else needed his help. He had just guided one of the last groups to a lower floor, near the exit. He spoke to his friend and coworker, a man named Dan Hill, and told him, "You've got to lead these people out. I've got to go back up." Dan begged him to come out, to save himself. But Rick just shook his head. He had to check one more time, make sure there was no one else. As Dan led the last group out into the light, he looked back up at the tower. Rick was still inside, climbing those smoky stairs, searching for any stragglers. The building had been burning for a long time, and it was badly hurt. At 9:59 a.m., a little over an hour after the plane hit, the impossible happened. The South Tower, one of the mighty twin towers, began to collapse. It didn't just fall. It crumbled down into a giant cloud of dust and debris, a terrible roar filling the air. It was a sight no one could believe. And Rick Rescorla, the brave soldier who had saved so many, was still inside. He was last heard on the phone telling his wife, Susan, "Don't cry, I have to go now." He was doing what he always did, putting others first, even to the very end. Rick, the hero who sang to save thousands, did not make it out of the building alive. He gave his life so that others could live. Rick Rescorla may not have made it out of the South Tower alive, but his story lives on, shining brightly as a true example of heroism. The thousands of people he saved that day will never forget him. They remember his booming voice, his steady commands, and especially his songs. It's not just that he led them to safety, it's asterisk how he did it, with a brave heart, a clear mind, and a comforting tune. People often talk about heroes who wear capes or have special powers. But Rick was a hero in a suit and tie, a man whose superpower was caring for others and being ready for anything. His bravery wasn't just about facing danger. It was about thinking ahead, planning, and practicing, even when it seemed unnecessary. He taught us that true courage is often quiet and steady, built on preparation and a deep sense of duty. His singing became a famous part of his story. Imagine being in a terrifying situation, smoke everywhere, a building shaking, and someone starts singing old songs to make you feel better. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, human kindness and a little bit of unexpected joy can make a huge difference. Rick used every tool he had, his military training, his leadership skills, his humor, and his voice, to protect his people. Today, when we remember September 11th, we also remember Rick Rescorla. He is a symbol of hope and selflessness. His actions prove that one person, with enough bravery and care, can change the outcome for thousands. He is remembered as the 9/11 hero who sang to save thousands, a man whose legacy will continue to inspire us to be prepared, to be brave, and always, always to put others first. His spirit, like the songs he sang, echoes through time, a timeless reminder of what it means to be truly heroic.